Hey guys, I figured tonight would be as good a time as any to take a closer look at this set. Maybe do some simple repairs, some basic troubleshooting, get this thing to work better in just one night. One thing I want to do right away is I thought the front of this set was just absolutely miserable when I got it, and I realized that's dirt. Like some muddy water got splashed all over the front of this thing. So I had a damp rag and maybe a little lemon polish or something, or lemon oil rather, and clean up the front of this thing. And I want to pull out this chassis. If you recall, I could not get channels 3 and 4 to work, which is irritating because that's a common source of analog video these days. So I suspect there's something up with the tuner. Plus, I've never seen underside of the chassis. There's a metal piece of safety mesh inside the cabinet. But the sets more or less work. Go back and watch part 1 if you haven't seen it already. And I'm curious to see what condition those old components are actually in inside this set. Well, that cleaned up a whole lot better than I expected. Even the decals look pretty darn good. There's just some discoloration here where the lacquer's worn away from years of people changing the channel, but geez, I think I would be a pretty good idea to try to preserve this front if at all possible. Now the rest of the cabinet's pretty miserable. Like the top, it's finish gone in a lot of areas like I showed in the earlier video, so the top definitely has to be refinished. And this side has a big chunk of finish gone here, so that needs to be done. These are pretty chewed up, all around the base it's chewed up. But I could certainly mask off the center part and retain all this. And maybe just a little bit of touch up on here where it's chipping. And, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. This side isn't too bad. These got to be touched up with a little bit of stain or a touch-up marker or something. But again, around the base, the finish is just gone. So maybe a little creative selective refinishing. I don't know. But for now, I'm not going to mess with that. Next up, I'm going to loosen up the bolts and pull out this upper chassis and take a peek underneath. All 4 original bolts were actually holding the chassis, and they were all on there pretty tight. Again, makes me think that this set may have seen little, if any, servicing in its life. Inside of the cabinet. Not sure why there's a sort of odd white splash of paint around that opening. But anyways, pretty sound inside, and there's that safety screen. And here is the rather dirty chassis. So let's take a look at a few more tubes and see if those are Admiral branded as well. So far, just about every tube I've looked at, yep, another Admiral. Every tube I've looked at, I think, except the main 5U4 rectifier down there has been Admiral branded. Admiral? Sylvania. Maybe a replacement. Another Sylvania. That's curious though, because the other tube, that 5U4 replacement, where I thought might be replaced, that's a Sylvania. And that's an Admiral. Now that I remember, actually, this is also, I think, so yeah. So actually, every tube has been either an Admiral or a Sylvania. So it's entirely possible that the Sylvania branded tubes are originals as well. Either that or Admiral. maybe whatever service shop this was taken to only used either Admiral or Sylvania replacement tubes. I don't know, of course. Alright, so now what we've all been waiting to see is what the heck does the underside of this thing look like? So, let's see what can I grab onto. There it is. I can tell you right away, one potential issue with this tuner I've been fighting with is that definitely some of these terminals are really, really dirty. Some are a bit shinier, but these are just filthy. And there are all the parts. And okay, that's probably a replacement. I think every 30A1 chassis I've ever looked at has had one or both of these replaced. That's, I think, the original. Just seems to be a really common point of failure. That is also very likely a replacement. And that is on this coil, and that's what I was adjusting in part 1 when I was trying to get the horizontal to lock. So if these capacitors drift off value, you have to adjust this coil to compensate. Well, I just don't see a whole lot of repairs. Some wax drip down onto that. That might be a replacement, because I don't see any other caps in that style in the whole set. Oh, there's one other down there. Early type of coax here for the volume control. So, as I was saying, ooh, look at that. Remember I was saying in part 1, yeah, that's got to be replaced. I was smelling some burning smells, and I was trying not to run this set for very long, just long enough to try to get an image. And I was smelling kind of a hot electronic smell, starting to smell some melting wax. Well, obviously we've got a problem down there. And I can see some of these other caps look like here and here. In fact, that, geez, I haven't had the set turned on for for hours, days even. Got this set on Monday, and we're later in the week now, and that I don't know what that is. It's certainly not hot, so it seems to be some kind of oil. This guy's kind of cruddy too, so. And this one too. And these old wax caps. Check out that guy. It's also getting kind of nasty. This end is starting to come out a little bit. There's just really no sense in keeping any of these old parts around. I don't see Dumont on that. That might be a replacement. Doubt Admiral would have put a Dumont part in this originally. Now, the nice thing about these is if you've got a little stash of axial plastic film caps on hand like I do, it's very, very easy to replace these things. Clip out the part, put a new one in, bam, you're done. Not like rebuilding Philco radio Bakelite blocks or anything like that. But I said I wanted to do this methodically and kind of troubleshoot and do bit by bit, so I think there is a really good place to start. Before I get this chassis up on the workbench and start diving into it, I've got something else to look at, and that's the lower chassis. I just removed the bolts that were holding it in, and I think it's a very good sign that all the original bolts were there. So very likely this is all original, never been serviced. So I took out the bolts that hold this piece of wood to the frame, which doesn't free up the chassis, it just frees up this bottom board, which is rather heavy because of the weight of these transformers. What's nice about this board is that it completely seals off the underside of this chassis. So in these sets that I've taken apart before, it's been rather pristine under here, and I hope that will be the case on this chassis as well. All the original hardware was present on this board as well. I just took off all 4 screws, so here we go. Probably the first time this has seen light since 1948. Bit of corrosion all around, but otherwise looks to be in pretty darn good shape, and these caps have not lost their guts either. This would be all for the audio amp right here. There's the big, I think, or no, that's the cathode bias resistor, but no, that's this guy over here. 270 ohms. This, I think, is part of a filter. So, just like the other chassis, easy enough to snip these out and pop new caps in, but for now I'm going to leave them in place and just focus on the stuff that I can tell is certainly wrong, like that burned out resistor. While I work on the electronics, that old rusty hardware is going to get a nice bath and some rust stripper. It's turning out to be a rather chilly, damp evening in Chicago, so what better way to kill the time than work on an old TV? Certainly can't do much with my cabinet work. The lacquer's taken a very long time to cure. It's going to go down into the 30s for the next couple nights, actually. And that's after we were almost hit 90 a couple weeks ago. Oh well, so here's the fried resistor. I have the original Sam's with part locator on it. I was able to determine that is R77, should be a 3.3K resistor. So we start out by replacing that. Of course, it may be burned out because there's something else wrong, or it may have just burned out on its own. I don't know yet. And let's see, where is that used? I believe it's in the sink separator somewhere. Yeah, down here. So I was able to get a sink on the picture, even with that being burned out, but perhaps the sink will work even better with it being in. But that's not going to solve a couple of the problems I experienced. One was that I couldn't get reception on channels 3 and 4. Another was that I had to crank the vertical height control up all the way, and I still didn't quite have full vertical height. Tuner, I was speculating that it might be missing some channel sections, but no, here's 3, here's 4, here's 5, and they're a little bit dirty but not too bad, but I'll certainly clean those points up. And also, there's a little service port they provide here. If I take this cover off, I can get to the contacts in the tuner that actually brush up against these, and I can make sure that those are all cleaned up. I can also pop these sections out and make sure there's nothing wrong inside of them. And I actually do have a spare chassis I could pop replacement coils out of if need be. And as for the vertical, that's a fairly common problem to have insufficient vertical or no vertical at all. So we can check the vertical output, check that tube and parts around there. Or sorry, that's the video output. Sorry about this, the vertical output. Check the parts around here. Like there's the height control. Let's check the vertical oscillator. Now some of you noticed something that I had not noticed in the first video on this set, which was arcing or sparking around the fuse every time I changed channels. Oh, well, gee. That was easy enough. I had not noticed that at all before, is that the connection to the fuse holder is completely broken free. So every time I was changing channels, this contact must have been jumping around. So I'll see what I can do about fixing that. That should take care of that problem. Also want to see if I can grease up this tuner a little bit, because the tension on this thing is ridiculous. And that is because of this guy. It's a piece of spring steel here with a roller. And man, that is way, way, way tighter than I've experienced in other sets. Maybe in this early version of this set, they used a stronger spring. I don't know. Well, like I said earlier, this isn't exactly the first revision. It's the second or third. There's a screw down there. Maybe I can loosen that up. It'll take some of the tension off of that. Because now that I see how tight this is, I don't think putting a few drops of oil or grease here and there is going to do a whole lot with that much tension on that thing. Now, something else I think that could be pretty fruitful in this set, just like the GE set I've been working on, is to check the tubes. I noticed that quite a few of them were the original Admirals, and I would imagine they've seen quite a bit of use after all this time. In fact, let me show you a couple of them. I noticed some of these tubes, like this guy, which I think is a 6SN7, and it's probably the original Admiral. It's got those nice silver spots above each of the plates. That's a sign it's seen quite a bit of use. Doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's seen a bit of use. And that is, I believe, part of the vertical circuitry. In fact, I think that's the vertical oscillator, and this would be the vertical output tube. Again, it's an Admiral, and again, it's got a nice silver spot on top from hard use. So if either of these tubes is weak, that could account for insufficient vertical height. I popped in a new resistor, and I noticed one of the wires going to it goes over to this guy. And these are notorious for failing, but they usually fail open. And if it went open, I wouldn't think it would fry that resistor, but maybe it would. That certainly could affect it. What happens with these, as you can see here, is, hey, look at that. This coating comes off, these wires start corroding, and these things go open. So definitely want to check that guy. What I found curious too is that, I'll find it quickly, on the SAMs here, when you look at the photo of the power resistors, they show two of the tubular ceramic type. In other words, two of these guys. Whereas I'm pretty sure every set I've seen that was all original had these in there. So I don't know if these were replaced when SAMs took the reference photo, or if in later production they switched to these because they were having a problem with those crappy sand-coated ones. Don't know. And as for the tuner, I popped out some of these sections and they seem to be fine. I got continuity between them. Also popped open the service port here, and it looks okay, just a little dirty, so I'll blow some dust out, shoot some contact cleaner in there, work the control. I work the knob back and forth and see if that clears that up. And now I'm going to go check some tubes. First up, I'm checking the 6K6 vertical output tube. And I'm not surprised to see we've got a little bit of leakage, also known as secondary emission. That's when emissive material migrates from the cathode to the grid, so when the tube should not be conducting, it actually is a little bit. This isn't horrible though, it's still in the green. And we don't have any gas, and we don't have any shorts. The quality is pretty good, so I'd say this tube is just fine. Now let's check the 6SN7 vertical oscillator tube. This tube also has some leakage, and actually a bit more than the other tube, but still in the green. Probably wouldn't hurt to replace it though. Gas. Quality, whoa! Well, that could be the source of our problem, because the output of this tube is what drives the vertical output tube. So even though the vertical output tube tested good, the tube preceding it is very weak. So that could be a problem. This is a two-section tube. To test the other section, you hold down this and then hold down this. And usually both, if one section's weak, the other side will be too. So this tube's got to go. So as I said earlier, I want to do this methodically. So instead of just testing all the tubes, replacing all the tubes, replacing all the caps, I'm just going to do it bit by bit. So let's replace this tube, I replaced that one resistor. I'll fix the fuse up, clean the tuner pins, and then let's fire the set back up. See what difference that stuff made. Alright, I managed to get both chassis up on my workbench. Kind of a pain to work on this with the dual chassis and the umbilical. Also needed to have the speaker because of the field coil in it. And now I can see that the speaker cone is in fine condition. So, I did test this, and I was surprised to see that it still measures good, so I'm going to leave it in there for the time being. And I now know why that fuse broke. It's been a little while since I worked on one of these, but when I was trying to repair it, I realized what had happened. And that's because these Admiral sets originally used an oddball type fuse. I think this type of glass cylindrical fuse was fairly new back in the mid-late 40s. At any rate, they made a type that's shorter than later fuses. So somebody jammed in a fuse. It's the right value, but is about, eighth of an inch, maybe quarter of an inch longer, which is what dislodged this end of it and broke it right off the mount. Right now, I just soldered it all back together, but it's not held on there securely, so at some point I'll probably want to replace that fuse holder with one for the more modern type. I would love to use the original smaller type fuse. I can't find them. I don't think they're made anymore. It's not like the new small fuses that are smaller in length and in diameter. These old ones were the same size diameter as the modern ones that are, I think, like 1.25 inches long, but they were only like 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch long, or 7/8 or something like that. So unless I can find a big stash of them, I think on my Admiral sets I'm just going to have to start modifying the fuse holders to use modern type fuses. Alright, what else did I do? I put in a new 6SN7, sprayed a bunch of contact cleaner in the tuner, buffed out those contact pins. I reinstalled the knobs so I got controls that I can manipulate, and I sprayed deoxit in the controls. And I think that's it. So if I plug this cheater cord in, turn this guy on, turn the set on, should power up. Now I want to keep an eye on that resistor and see if it starts frying, and if it does, I want to turn the set off immediately. Or what I think I'll do is just sort of run for a little while and turn the set off and see if it's getting hot. Still got channel 6 reception. I mucked around with the controls and the ion trap magnet, so I'm going to have to readjust that to get a picture, but let's see if this is warm. No. Barely warm at all. Alright, so I'll turn that back on and set the camera down so you guys can see the screen. I muck around with the controls and the ion trap. There we go. That's kind of handy. I set the viewfinder up so I can see that, so I don't know. Normally servers would use a mirror so they can see the front of the set while they're manipulating controls on the back, but the camera's viewfinder does a pretty good job of that too. Tighten down the thumb screws and the ion trap so it'll stop moving all around as I'm trying to do stuff. Alright. I think it's pretty good about there. Focus is horrible. Still never sound. Something I was curious about was the height. Does seem better now with that new tube in there. Turn it off again, see if that resistor is getting hot. No, resistor is nice and cool. Alright, so the other thing was, can I receive on channels 3 and 4? So I'm going to hook up a signal source that's on channels 3 and 4 and see if I can pick them up. So here are a couple modern fuses. Here's the large type, like what's in the set right now. Here's the mini modern type. And this is what the set had originally. It's the same diameter as this, but it's shorter. But it's also longer than that. So, if anybody knows of a source of this type of fuse, I don't even know what to call them. I don't know what the size designator is. Please let me know. Now, let's see about receiving channel 3 or 4. I did put a little oil on the switch. I couldn't loosen up that spring steel any, so the tuner is still pretty chunky. Looks like nothing there. Let's try this. Boy, that's aggravating. Because my standard signal source for live over the air stuff was only on channels 3 and 4. Alright, well, my next thought now is that the two tubes in the tuner, like the local oscillator tube, hey, what do you know? It turns out I had the contrast turned down too low. Oh. So what as I turn the fine tuning, something's shorting out somewhere. No sound. Picture's not great. Okay, there is sound in a very small spot. Right about there. I'm also smelling some kind of hot, waxy smell, so I imagine some of these leaky caps are. Ooh, channel 3, much better.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Huh, got the focus good, now I lost sound. Oh, I see, because the focus and sound knobs are kind of scraping together. Yeah, things are getting much better.
Thousands of ordinary people. To most of them, this hour will be a rest, a pleasant break in a day's routine. To most, but not all.
You get some more
In
height.
Edward Hall, time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death.
Well, vertical height and linearity are still pretty stinky. So more work to do there, but it's getting better. So I'll rotate the camera around for you guys. That's probably a little bit more watchable. Alright, so what next? Well, right now I'm going to turn the set off. That smell's getting a little disconcerting. See if that resistors. No? Ooh, don't like that. Very loose. So that horizontal coil, that's what I had to adjust in part 1 more, so I could finally get lock on it. I think that some of these caps have been replaced and that's kind of loose, but it is working, so I'm not going to mess with it. Oh no, there we go. Or no, that's the cap I was talking about earlier that it seemed, even though it was cool, it was gooey. And it's not warm now, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just curious to see if there's any warm caps, because if there are, those are ones that should be replaced sooner than later, but you know, everything's cool. And yeah, I don't recommend poking your fingers around a set after it's been turned on. You could get shocked, but I kind of know what I'm doing, so. This is one of the oddest things in this particular set. There's actually a selenium rectifier on the 6.3 volt filament with a couple electrolytic filter caps, and that's to provide a clean DC supply, I think, for the tubes in the tuner to eliminate any possible noise that could get in there or any hum. Let's see. Let me show it on the schematic here. Yeah, here we go. Down in there, and then it feeds the filament on the... Actually, it's on the sound amplifier. Then through an inductor, and that's for the tubes in the sound IF. They must have been getting hum, maybe, in the sound IF stages, and they decided to eliminate it. They would filter the filament so that these tubes are running on DC filament supply. Yeah, as we can hear, man, it sounds pretty darn good, so maybe they knew what they were doing back then. So still, I think I'm going to stick with the vertical and check the components around the vertical amp and vertical oscillator and see if anything's out of spec and replace it and see if we can get some better height. I've been going through the vertical circuits down here, and all the resistors check okay. All a little bit high, but within 10-20%. So then I started checking the electrolytics. In particular, this guy and that guy. Right now I've got my meter set on this guy, and it seems to be okay. Full eye open. Oh, around 20. You know, the tolerance on these electrolytics is pretty wide. And when I check for leakage, looks good. So we charge up on one side of the neon bulb, discharge on the other. Looks good. Now the other electrolytic. And by the way, I disconnected all the leads from the electrolytics before I tested these. This guy's a little confusing. The capacitance seems alright. Get a full eye open, just about at the upper limit of this tester. This tester only goes to 70 microfarads, and that's supposed to be a 50. So getting a full eye open, just about at the end of it. But when I test for leakage, it does charge up on one side, but nothing on the discharge side, which makes me suspicious if this cap is really good or not. So I'm going to tack in a replacement for that guy and hook the other cap back up. And then just on a hunch, I checked this big power resistor here. It should be 3.9K, and it's measuring about 6 point something. So I'm going to replace that. I don't even know it's part of the circuit. It was just sticking kind of right out in front and center, so I figured I would check it for the heck of it. What I'm starting to suspect, though, is that even with that electrolytic in there, we may still have some lacking vertical height in which case we got to start looking at all these paper caps down in here. Because really, other than the electrolytics, which, yeah, sometimes you can reform or they have some life left, but these paper caps, I mean, they all degrade over time. Moisture gets in there, they start getting leaky, nothing you can do about it. So the fact that this set's working at all just is a bit unusual, and probably means the set was stored in an environment that was conducive to preserving these paper caps. But I don't doubt that some or most or maybe all of them are a bit leaky. Okay, there's my new power resistor and new electrolytic down in there. Let's see if that had any impact. It would seem not. Notice the vertical hold is pretty damn crappy on this set too. So that's something else we want to take a look at.
It's the only thing that eases the pain. It'll be all right.
Height still stinks. There's something else that's occurred to me. Is that this set has a rectangular mask on it. It's not like a porthole set or a double D set, where you'd have, a double D has a mask that cuts off the top and the bottom, but you see the full curve on either side. A set like this has a rectangle covering the set. So you never see the top and the bottom, and you don't see the part of the left or right either. So it's actually a little bit too wide. There's no reason to have the image go all the way to the left or right edges. There is a horizontal drive control in the back. That's what I'm changing right now, and that does manipulate the width a bit. But I suspect there are some other issues there going on there. We still don't have full height. So I think the next thing to do is to start checking these paper caps down in here. But it's getting kind of late, so I'm going to save that until tomorrow. Probably tomorrow night, maybe afternoon. We'll see.